Welcome to my YouTube channel. Please subscribe my YouTube channel. The PM also doubled down his pledge to put British troops on the ground in Ukraine, despite kickback from other European countries. In a call with Volodymyr Zelensky and other leaders, he said, "Russia does not hold all the cards in this war." It will be seen as another gentle rebuke to Donald Trump, who last week said the Russians have the cards in settlement negotiations. The U.S. president has thrown geopolitics into disarray by initiating peace talks with Russia, while freezing out the Ukrainians and branding Mr. Zelensky a dictator. European allies today rallied round the Ukrainian leader as they marked 3 years since the invasion. Zooming in from No 10, Sir Keir said, "We must keep dialing up the economic pressure to get Putin to a point where he is ready not just to talk, but to make concessions." So today we're announcing the UK's largest package of sanctions since the early days of the war. Going after Russia's shadow fleet, and going after companies in China and elsewhere who are sending military components. Later today I will be discussing further steps with the G7, and I am clear that the G7 should be ready to take on more risk, including on the oil price cap, sanctioning Russia's oil giants, and going after the banks that are enabling the evasion of sanctions. Stressing Britain's unwavering support for Ukraine, the PM added, "Russia does not hold all the cards in this war, because the Ukrainians have the courage to defend their country." He added, "The UK is ready and willing to support this with troops on the ground, with other Europeans, and with the right conditions in place. And ultimately a US backstop will be vital to deter Russia from launching another invasion in just a few years' time." Zelensky has vowed to step down as Ukraine's president in exchange for peace or NATO membership. The shock remarks were made at a press conference this weekend as he emphasized that Ukraine's security was his priority. Zelensky said on Sunday, "If it's about peace in Ukraine and you really want me to leave my position, I am ready to do that, in exchange for peace. Secondly, I can exchange it for NATO membership. If there is such an opportunity, I'll do it immediately without a long conversation about it." Sir Keir Starmer announces new round of Russian sanctions to crank up pressure on Vladimir Putin. In a decisive move aimed at intensifying pressure on the Kremlin, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer today announced a fresh wave of sanctions against Russia. The new measures, unveiled in a high-profile press conference at Downing Street, are designed to force President Vladimir Putin to make significant concessions in ongoing peace negotiations over the Ukraine conflict. A strategic blow to Moscow. Addressing a packed room of journalists, Starmer underscored the United Kingdom's unwavering commitment to supporting Ukraine and holding Russia accountable for its continued aggression. "These sanctions are a message to President Putin that his war of aggression will not go unanswered," Starmer declared. "The UK will use every tool at its disposal to squeeze the Russian economy and ensure that the cost of continued hostilities far outweighs any perceived benefit." The measures target key sectors of the Russian economy, including finance, energy, and defense, while also expanding restrictions on high-profile oligarchs and government officials known to be close to Putin. Sanctions overview, a multi-pronged approach. The latest sanctions package includes financial restrictions, stricter controls on Russian financial institutions, limiting their access to international markets and cutting off avenues for capital movement. Energy sector crackdown, additional embargoes on Russian oil and gas exports to undermine a vital revenue stream for Moscow. Defense industry strangulation, prohibition of British technology exports that could contribute to Russia's military capabilities. Oligarch asset freezes, the freezing of assets belonging to Kremlin-aligned billionaires with business interests in the UK, alongside expanded travel bans, cyber and digital clampdown. Enhanced measures against Russian cyber operations, including tighter regulations on technology transfers and digital surveillance capabilities. By striking at the core of the Russian economy, these sanctions seek to weaken Putin's ability to sustain his military campaign while bolstering Ukraine's position at the negotiating table. A coordinated Western effort. Starmer emphasized that the UK's latest actions are being coordinated with international allies, including the United States, the European Union, and NATO partners. "Solidarity is our greatest weapon," he stated. "We are working in lockstep with our allies to ensure that these sanctions have maximum impact and that Russia feels the full weight of global opposition." The Prime Minister also confirmed that Britain would continue its military and humanitarian aid to Ukraine, pledging an additional £500 million in support. The package includes advanced weaponry, medical supplies, and funding for rebuilding efforts in war-ravaged areas. Russia's response: defiance and retaliation. Moscow has predictably reacted with condemnation, dismissing the UK's measures as economic warfare. The Russian Foreign Ministry warned that the sanctions would not alter the Kremlin's strategic course and vowed countermeasures against British businesses operating in Russia. In a televised address, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov declared, "The West continues its futile attempts to strangle the Russian economy, but they underestimate our resilience. These sanctions will not deter us, they will only strengthen our resolve." Some analysts fear that Russia may retaliate by cutting off energy supplies to European markets or intensifying cyber warfare tactics against Western nations. The domestic and global impact. While the new sanctions have been lauded as a necessary response to Russian aggression, they are not without potential consequences for the UK economy. Some British businesses with ties to Russia could face financial strain, and there are concerns about possible disruptions in global energy markets. Opposition voices within the UK have raised concerns about the impact of prolonged sanctions on British households, particularly as energy prices remain volatile. However, Starmer remained firm in his stance, arguing that the cost of inaction would be far greater. "We must be prepared to make sacrifices now to ensure a safer, more stable world for future generations," he asserted. This is a moral and strategic imperative. The road ahead. As the war in Ukraine grinds on, the effectiveness of these sanctions in influencing Putin's decisions remains to be seen. Some experts believe that sustained economic pressure could eventually force Moscow into meaningful negotiations, while others argue that Putin's regime has proven resilient in the face of previous sanctions. For now, the UK and its allies are committed to maintaining pressure, hoping that each new measure brings them closer to a resolution. Starmer has vowed that Britain will not waver in its support for Ukraine, promising that this latest round of sanctions is just one step in a long-term strategy to ensure peace and security in the region. In the coming weeks, all eyes will be on Moscow's response and whether the tightening economic noose will finally push the Kremlin toward meaningful concessions, or drive it further into defiance.